Good evening, everyone. My name is Bradley Cantrell. I'm chair and professor here in the Department of Landscape Architecture at UVA. I'd like to begin with a recognition that the University of Virginia is located on the land of the Monacan people. We give our honor and respect. We also acknowledge the enslaved laborers that built the grounds and architecture and contribute to the spaces we occupy today. I'm pleased to introduce tonight's Miles M. Thaler lecturer, Dr. C.L. Bohannon. Thank you to the Thalers for their generous contribution to the School of Architecture and the Department of Landscape Architecture. Dr. Bohannon is the Associate Director of the School of Architecture and Design, Associate Professor in Landscape Architecture, and Faculty Principal of the Leadership and Social Change Residential College, LSCRC, at Virginia Tech. As a faculty principal in the LSCRC for the past 2 years, CL is a strong advocate for representation and dialogue. This unique college is part of the Living Learning programs where students live in a residential college and learn through interdisciplinary connections with their students and a live-in faculty member. The focus of the LSCRC is to lead in a complex global environment and enrich backgrounds of diversity and inclusivity. Dr. Bohannon's research focuses on the relationship between community engagement and design education, primarily through design for social and environmental justice. Through his research, Dr. Bohannon works in the landscape context of community history and identity, social and environmental justice and injustice, and community learning. His research has led to contributions to the theorization and application of community engagement in design education. CL teaches courses on community-engaged design research methods, contemporary research topics in landscape architecture, and seeing, understanding, and representing landscapes. His talk tonight is titled Exploring Uneven Geographies Through Disruptive Engagement. Please help me in welcoming C.L. Bohannon. You're muted, C.L.
There we go. I told myself I wasn't going to do that. Here we go. All right. So, Brad, thank you for that, for the introduction. And hopefully this particular forum will be a fruitful space for understanding how we as landscape architects can continue to engage community members to help address social and environmental inequalities through design education and through design practice. So as part of this narrative, or I'll get to talk a little bit about disruptive engagement and what that means, I'd also like to give acknowledgement to my ancestors. Without their sacrifice, I wouldn't be here today. Here's a piece. I am a son of the Delta. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. I am a proud, I'm a product of my ancestors' sacrifice and hard work. I'm also a descendant of lives that were gone too soon. And I'll take a responsibility to carry forward their legacies in the hope to make a more just world. And so with that, I'd like to open this talk with looking at the narratives of white supremacy within my own family. I mean, these Parks family and community in which I grew up. Nathan Bedford Forrest, the image that you see in the center of the screen, I won't go into his whole history there, but being a Grand Wizard of the KKK, he was tasked with developing the railroad from Memphis to Little Rock. And on that path between Memphis and Little Rock is a town called Forest City, which my own grandparents, grandfather was a pastor there. And so it's interesting to see, where these legacies of supremacy, how they touch and can touch your family. So in addition to that, Nathan Bedford Forrest also utilized the land that now holds the community of French Fort. You'll see a picture of myself and my grandmother and my great uncle who lives, grand uncle lives in French Fort, the community. And it was the second community in the city, the first being Orange Mound, that used to be a 5,000 acre plantation in the city. But French Fort is of particular interest because Nathan Bedford Forrest used that land as a staging area for cattle and for agricultural production for his men as they marched east to west to finish the railroad. And this is also part of the legacy of urban renewal. One of the first areas in the city where African Americans that could actually were allowed to buy homes. It's kind of an interesting place, not only because of that, but also how it's sited and being so close to the river and also really close to some of the areas where they refine oil in the city. And so that brings me to this whole notion of like, these things are not by happenstance, right? My neighborhood is killing me. The very siting of communities and the ramifications that come of that. Also part of this, Memphis is also at the intersection of Interstate 40 and Interstate 55, east, west, and northwest travel. A lot of environmental impacts that have hit a number of the communities back home with long haul trucking and horrible air quality. And this is actually has affected my own community. This is across the river in West Memphis, Arkansas, where a lot of our family lived. And you can see, looking at the cancer index, it's 95 to 100%, looking at the cancer index. And then these areas are close to the river is where the oil refineries are. How do you get the oil to the refineries? Well, they have to travel through the roads, and you can see the way the West Memphis is kind of the way it developed was most of the African American communities were to the south and east, which means they hug the river and they also hug where the interstate system flows through the city, which means you get high amounts of traffic, thus high rates of cancer. Even in our own family, we've lost 4 or 5 members to cancer just in this community alone. So a lot of this work that I'm going to talk about comes from my own experiences with being resilient, what that means. So I put this image in here is to stop calling me resilient, because every time you say, oh, they're resilient, that means you can do something to me. I'm not resilient. So in the work that I do and I espouse my students to think about is even asking the question as to why communities have to be resilient in the first place, right? These things, citing of neighborhoods, citing of environmental inequalities are not by chance. They were allowed to happen through policy, through planning. They're allowed to happen through design, and we're complicit as a profession, I think, in some of the actual built environments in which where people live. Okay, and then I bring you to this quote by James Baldwin in a talk that he gave to teachers in 1963. The purpose of education finally is to create in a person the ability to look at the world for himself, to make his own decisions. What societies really ideally want is a citizenry which will simply obey the rules of society. If a society succeeds in this, that society is about to perish. And what's in bold here is really important. The obligation of anyone who thinks of himself as responsible is to examine society and to try to change and fight it at no matter what risk, right? This is the only hope that society has. This is the only way societies change. And so for me, here I think that Baldwin is demanding the disruption of the ideal of the, what is a citizen, right? Through what some call transgressive or education. And for me, this work is done through community engagement, whereby space is created for ground up processes of knowledge production and exchange. And these processes also incorporate everyday experiences of perspectives of often excluded and marginalized populations. And so to embrace education as a practice of freedom, right, is to understand that there's no legitimate conversation about disruption in education that does not exist or does not include, I should say, a focus on fighting oppression. And here I will ask you to think about this. If you inserted design into the same phrase, design as a practice of freedom, right? Thus no legitimate conversation about disruption in design education that does not focus on fighting oppression. And that's how I see this notion of disruptive engagement or community engagement, then disruptive engagement moving forward. So for my lab and the work that we do, we think about partnerships with communities. We always work with, not on. So you get that reciprocal, mutual beneficial outcomes. Also the knowledge exchange, two-way co-creation of knowledge. And in my lab, we don't use the term service or outreach, we use engagement, because we feel that the degree of academic and intellectual influence and the influence on our community partners is greater. This is when new knowledge is created and produced and disseminated in ways that's actually useful to solve some of the problems that need to be addressed. And so I get to this quote by Bell Hooks, our very presence is a disruption. And I think about, my own family and other people that have been marginalized and not being, part of the processes that have altered their the built environment in which they live, the conditions in which they live. And I think for me and for, my students that work with me in the lab, and even in the residential college here, the very presence of marginalized people in a process that seeks to change the built environment for, or provide social change for people is a disruption. So therefore, we have to get the people who have not had a chance to have a seat at the table to actually have a seat at the table, for their voice to be heard, for their experiences to be understood, and most importantly, for us to listen and not always come with like we have a solution, but we should be listening first. And so, getting to this thing, well, Dr. B, what is disruptive engagement? What is this duality of this term? And for me, the engagement, disruptive engagement, is a theory of change, right? So it's meant to serve as both a chronicle of the past. We need to understand, like, hey, these things have happened. We tend to problematize and understand, but also we can use it as a model for the future. So if we do not do something, right? If we do not intervene, in this case through design, injustice will keep happening if we don't act, right? And that's where this notion of an engaged design research can start to create the space and value and processes that will start to disrupt existing inequalities and injustice in our society. Oops. This also relates to place-based community engagement, right? A geographic focus, having equal emphasis on community impact. It should be a long-term vision and commitment. I firmly believe that you cannot parachute in and do an engagement project here and do one here and not have that long-term commitment and trust building in order for that work to be substantial and actually have a positive impact. And also understanding ways that you can look at university-wide engagement that animates the mission and develops the institution. In our case at Virginia Tech, being a land grant, it makes sense. And then with our motto, that I may serve, UPROSUM, it fits into the type of work and the type ways in which we can be and that we need to be disruptive. And also, drawn upon the concept of collective impact. What does that actually mean to collectively understand the good that our work can actually do? And then you think pedagogically. So I'm mixing a lot of different things here. For the residential college piece, we utilize the social change model with, you see the 7 C's there, but what's really important to think about is the individual level. So focusing on personal traits and that are needed for social change. And then the group level that gets to your ability to actually collaborate. And that's across disciplines. And then the community and societal level, focusing on using leadership, right, to address social concerns. And that's the critical piece when we're utilizing the social change model and also looking at leadership theory. And then the notion of reflective practice, right? Distinguishing between problem setting and problem solving. Self-reflection is a critical component. How do we interrogate our own practices as landscape architects, as educators, as people in society? And then also understanding the epistemology of multiplicity, realizing that knowledge doesn't always flow from the ivory tower down to the community. That's why I don't use the term outreach, because it's like I'm giving you something, which in reality, if you take the stance that, or the starting point that communities are actually experts, right, in their lived experiences in the places in which they live, we should be coming in and be able to listen. I say listen twice and act once in that regard. But we should be able to use the skills that we do have as designers, but we shouldn't privilege one over the other. And then you look at Fierre's work, using education against power structures, That's embedded in being disruptive and understanding the risks that you should take, also a risk that you can take, also understanding your own that you have. And then coming together to educate and using authentic dialogue. For us here in our program and in the lab that I run, it's about narratives, it's about stories, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then this other piece that's like at the bottom that talks about Boyer. We do write, we do publish a lot of our work. We don't just engage for the sake of engaging. So looking at discovery, integration, application, and how do we then teach, not only just for faculty, teaching students, but also our upper level students that have done engagement work, and how that cycle can then, again, through leadership and a social change model, help them become teachers for our students that are coming through the program. And then a little bit on, I did this whole study many years ago when I was a PhD student that looked at like community engagement across the curriculum and landscape architecture. And it was quite interesting. I just pull a couple of excerpts out of this, but faculty did believe, that engagement is a viable tool for design education, offers opportunities for critical thinking, which I agree with this, and also creates a richer educational experience for students in design education. The piece that was interesting is that there was about 33% that was still not sure about how engagement can be used to create new knowledge. And I think that's an important piece where we get into this disruptive engagement, but also mapping that onto the engagement of scholarship. Like, how do you actually write about the work and write with your students, write with your community members about the change that design processes, planning processes can bring forth. But that gets to the opportunities for publication. There are opportunities for publication. There's ways that you can share your engagement through conference presentations, mentorship. Again, the three pieces of journals and articles and things like that. So there is room within the academy to do this work. And then I put this diagram in here to really get you to understand how we utilize engagement, with the design studio. We have a course called Community Methodologies that I teach, and then we have a number of special topics courses that go across the curriculum. And that's in landscape architecture. And then we have the Leadership and Social Change Residential College, or the LSCRC, where we have normally 6 to 8 community engagement projects happening every spring semester. That's 300 students in the building, and it's a way to look at this, how you can engage with people that are in landscape architecture, and then students that are in creative writing or civil engineering, and how do you bring those students together to solve or to look at some of the issues of society that relate to food insecurity or social justice issues, or something that relates to environmental inequalities. And the LSCRC, I put this image in mostly to show you we try to situate the work. It's a little bit different working with freshmen and sophomores that are not in landscape architecture, not in architecture planning. And so we situate a lot of the work using the UN Sustainable Goals, and allow them to then start to investigate or unpack how their work as college students at Virginia Tech, in addition to their particular vocation that they've chosen to study, their major, how their work can then start to intersect with leadership in one regard, but also social change, right? So what happens when you get the creative writer and the civil engineer in the same room to talk about issues of poverty or living wage, or things like that are happening in Appalachia, but also how do we take that arc and then make it more global? So we have global partnerships in Senegal and a couple other countries where we're looking at issues that relate across geographic locations. And then the lab. So the lab is something where we introduce students to the interdisciplinary study of community, like what that actually means. We promote reflexive critical thinking. We want to develop leadership skills for effective service and citizenship, but also for students that are in design. The skills that we were teaching them in the lab also translates into their own work, but then also when they become practicing landscape architects and or faculty members as well. And then also, the community engaged field experiences, I think also provide a lot of insight and a lot of space for students to question and also interrogate their own practice in a way. And we do have some methods that we utilize for this. The R3, we work with real people on real problems, utilizing real projects, and we try to map those out over time. So we don't do what we call parachuting in. We try to take off manageable chunks and let the engagement scaffold throughout the curriculum. We utilize community mapping, community driven data, storytelling. Oral histories are a big part of what we do. Student reflections, and then also this notion of chronicling the past, but also looking at the future. And we call that reflect, articulate, and project. And those are really critical ways to have discussions with communities. And I can talk about that here in a couple slides. There are 4 core questions, that I usually work through with the students to get them to understand, why does social and environmental justice actually matter? This comes from the community methods course as well. And then when does unequal become unfair? And also, what are the social relations of production and power that contribute to some of the inequalities and injustices that students see, and that they will, in many cases that they face in themselves and in the communities in which they come to us from into Blacksburg. And then how can we be disruptive, right? How can we be disruptive in a way to mobilize communities towards social and environmental change? And that disruption can look different for different people in different roles, but collectively, I think when you move towards the disruption, that's exactly when change can happen. And so we think about, so I say all this to show you, this is the landscape that we work in, right? This is Appalachia. This is the, right outside, not too far from campus. It looks this way, right? And so, it's one of those landscapes at the surface where it's like, it's very pretty, it's very idyllic, all this kind of stuff that's happening, but there is something else that's going on in this landscape. And it's the extractive practices of, this is one example of coal. This is mountaintop removal that's been devastating the landscape in our area for a long time. And so with that, you get this notion of a sacrifice zone. And this is true. We are, the land is sacrificed, but what also is sacrificed are the people and the ways and their dreams and how they can actually progress in this world, to be good citizens, to have clean air, to have, clean drinking water, have a place to actually take their family, just to actually live. And so the narratives, again, going back to the narratives, Appalachia gets this, it's a worked landscape. It's people are still working in this landscape, but you get the whole notion of hillbillies and all these other kind of derogatory terms. But if you actually slow down and understand the people, there's a lot of care. There's a lot of narratives that go unseen. Like African Americans that actually worked in the coal fields and in Appalachia, and how this was a microcosm of the world, and people try to do the best they can and work together. But sometimes those slivers of history are overlooked. I like to show this image because it's, again, the sacrifice zone, the extractive qualities of coal. You got money coming in. You got money going out, and then you got the empty train coming in to take more resources away from the region. And you see this time and time again, as you travel through the area. And then you start looking at these geographies, right? So this is like looking at the opioid crisis. You can see Appalachia there. You see Mingo, West Virginia. You can see Kentucky and Virginia and West Virginia, how they merge together. And then you look at opioid death rates. You can see Appalachia again as high. So it's just like the hope and dreams often are also extracted, and that's where I make an argument that the people are also sacrificed through this, right? And so this is when we get to why stories matter, right? It's like, so this memory that brings photographs, newspaper headlines, neighborhood, streets and sidewalks and communities to life. Stories really, they do inform us about who we are today, who we were in the past, but also gives us a way to think about how we can build a future, right, and a future together. And then there's also ethics of stories, personal empowerment. Who's telling the story about the places in which you live or you inhabit, right? How those narratives, how do the narratives that are told about a place affect people's lives, right? That's a reality, right? And you talk about, narratives of liberation. So the quote here are anchored in people's stories. It's a sense of what stories we decide to tell from the basis of a critical pedagogy, right? And we also have to interrogate the practices that are within our own profession. What stories are we telling about landscape architecture, about planning, about design that are saving communities, not saving communities? Are we talking about how complicit we are in actually developing or allowing some of the conditions of the built environment to exist? And so, Blacksburg you see in the middle, and this is kind of the geographic area that we've been working in the lab, that stretches from Bluefield, West Virginia, and then Bluefield, Virginia is actually right next to it. You have to go through West Virginia to get back to Bluefield, Virginia, in that little corner of the Commonwealth there. And then also stretching to Roanoke, which is can be characterized as urban Appalachia. And so, greetings from Bluefield, right? So we did this project I think it's about a year and a half ago now, that looked at history, essence, and place. So it's like, what is the premise is like, how and why, or in what ways do people formulate the narratives of why people stay in a area that could be seen as declining, or it's like a dead coal town, as some people put it. So we were very interested to talk and do an oral history project. It started as an oral history project with people, community members in Bluefield, West Virginia, and Bluefield, Virginia, and looking at history, the railroads, coal camps, the disconnect with it. At one point, there is a HBCU there, and it had at one point a vibrant African American community. That is not necessarily the case, anymore. Looking at the Italian stonemasons that were brought to the area to work on the stone, but also work in the coal mines. And so you really start to understand that this place is more complex than what you see at the surface, right? And so through these interviews with quite a few community members, and you start to look at the beauty of the mountains, needing to diversify, looking back in the past where things were more lively, when the coal camps and things were at their height. Also dealing with mass exodus out of the area, where you now have the grandparents and the grandkids in some cases, and the younger kids, once they graduate from high school, they leave, right? And so what does that effect does that have on the community, the workforce, the economy that's there? But then you also get people like, this place has always felt home to them. So there's a lot of nuance to this. And so we took the oral histories and we developed this other project, was the people of Bluefield, and we went around and we did photo voice in some cases, and in other cases we did images and quotes, and we're able to be able to highlight some of the personal stories of the people who actually continue to stay, to live. This place is home, and that doesn't mean that property should go away, or people should go in and move people out, because it is a viable place, and I always say there's a there. And then coal came up a lot, as it's it's a part of the coal fields, but as we know now, energy is moving in some cases in a different direction, and the coal mines they don't need as many coal miners in the ways that they're doing the mountaintop removal, as I showed in the image a couple slides ago. And so what do? You have a workforce that's there. What do you do with this, right? And so we from the interviews, we came up with 4 areas, and then community inclusion, economic opportunities, looking at power and identity for those who live in the area, and then future outlooks, like how can we revitalize, what are some of the homegrown opportunities, what are some of the natural resources that can be capitalized on. And then, as you can see, education came up a lot through this. And so we went through a process of taking all of that information down to a couple key areas, focus areas that the community felt pretty good about, that actually they identified, outdoor spaces and parks, bringing back the arts, looking at the museums that we have, coffee shops, farmers markets, incubator businesses. There's, and I'll show this slide here momentarily, where, what do you do with out of work coal miners? And so the city of Bluefield, West Virginia, teamed up with MIT to actually do an incubator business to teach coal miners how to actually do coding, right? To get them into a updated, a new type of technology that could provide different jobs for them. And then restorative spaces, and then also spaces that can be used for youth education. There are a lot of kids, a lot of teenagers with not many outdoor places to be. So how do we do that? And so we went from the oral histories to the people of Bluefield kind of photo voice exercise to more community meetings, and the community decided, hey, here's a place that we would like to see if we can do something with. And it's one of those it's a typical mountain town where the buildings can be quite cavernous. The streets are kind of shaded. And in this particular case, there was 3 empty buildings that were there. And the city of Bluefield said, what happens if we just tore those down and we created our own kind of central park? And we're like, okay, let's see what that looks like. So we did a charrette. And this was part of our Dick Gibbons charrette, which was done with all of the students, all the undergrad and graduate students in our program. We actually hopped in vans and we drove up to Bluefield and did this charrette on site. And so here's some of the quick kind of schemes that were that were developed by the students. The building goes away. You can overlay a design scheme that looks at trying to get community members into the space. There's another render, kind of a quick render to show what that space can look like. And then they started to really use motifs of the railroads are I guess two blocks from here, which is that image I showed you of the coal coming in and the coal going out and the empty train coming in. That's not too far from this. So utilizing the motif of wood and what that means to actually have a trail to get people outside of downtown into the other areas there. And then even just providing a place where there's a lawn where they could have events, where they can cohabitate. This is all pre-COVID, by the way, as well. Of course, you wouldn't see that too much of that happening right now. And then the commercialization station is a second the second site, sorry, of this particular charrette. And this is the place where they were looking at to have incubator businesses. This is also the place where where they're putting in the lab to teach coal miners how to do coding, which I think is interesting. And so this was a quick scheme that was put together by a group of students to look at how you can also, as you bring more incubator businesses in, how do you then, bring to life the outside environment and allow people to have outdoor spaces that are viable, places where this now becomes a destination, not only for the businesses that are there, but also for the citizens of the Twin Cities of Bluefield. And then I bring you to Roanoke. So we go from Bluefield, Virginia, and West Virginia on the rural side of things to urban Appalachia and Roanoke and some of the issues that are happening there. And I go back to the Nolan plan, there's two of them, 08 and 26 or something like that. In the first plan, Nolan was really concerned about segregation, and he set up a plan that made an iconic statement about civic values and politics. And he believed that you can design a city in a way that the populace can be put together and to kind of change their mindsets and actually be able to invest in the community. But in the 28 plan, he actually set forth and said, hey, we need to pave streets, we need to provide more green spaces for the population in Roanoke. And at that time, Roanoke was like 3/4 of the population was African American at that time, and city leaders decided they were not going to make an investment at all in these communities. And I think that was one of the decisions that has kind of set the tone, many more to come after, that have actually marginalized a lot of the what will become African-American, longstanding African-American communities in Roanoke. Go back one. And then you start looking at urban renewal, 1949 in the city of Roanoke. The Roanoke City Council approved, the development of these public housing projects, and involved, several housing projects following urban renewal, that deconstructed African-American communities, Hurt Park, Lincoln Terrace, the Kennedys. I'm gonna come back to Hurt Park because that's one of our community partners. But you look at this image on your left side of the screen, many of you are probably familiar with Mindy Fullilove's work. She has a book called Root Shock, where she actually writes about Roanoke. And you look at the image on the left, and you see 581 that was built. So this is an urban renewal era infrastructure that connects 81 to 220, which will be Interstate 73. They're in the process of doing that. But during this time, in the 50s, you can see where it says Commonwealth, and you see the Civic Center site, and you see the post offices there, and then in the lower left where the Coca-Cola bottling plant was put in. These are areas were developed once the interstate was actually put in. And so, again, through our oral history process that began, I began being part of this in 2009. I was part of an interview where one of our participants mentioned that she grew up in the parking lot of the Civic Center, and I just was baffled by that. And she looked at me and said, "Understand what I'm saying? I grew up in the parking lot. This is where my house was, and then we were displaced." And a lot of the with Kimball and Gainsborough, those community members were displaced throughout the city, with most of them ending up in northwest Roanoke. And so you can see there's countless articles, countless information, but the slow violence of just the one inclusion of this urban renewal era infrastructure, 581, devastated the African American community in Roanoke, and they're still dealing with the results of this, right? And so this is where a lot of the work, again, about being disruptive comes in, and where we were asked to the lab to come in to help out. And then I go back to narratives. So you think about how, just think about your own community and where you grew up, and how people would describe it. And then think about, look at this image here, and this is in the paper, 1997, I think. And it says most troubled neighborhoods, right? But what's not talked about here is how the 581 actually caused a lot of these issues here, and particularly with Hurt Park, Gainsborough, Loudon Melrose Rugby, that's a little bit off the map, and then West End, and then you look at the dot matrix map, right? And so 460, which is the road that I talked about that spans from rural Appalachia to urban Appalachia. Well, this road actually goes through these communities, I should say, and actually crosses it goes under 581. And you can look at this dot matrix map here, and most of the communities that were displaced are African American. You can see the concentration in the northwest part of the quadrant of the city. And then I'm gonna zoom back out a little bit. So we look at food. You can see, again, food as an uneven geography. You can look at this map and you can tell. You see out west, you see some of the reservations. You look at where I grew up in the Delta, from Tennessee all the way down to the Mississippi. To the Gulf of Mexico, the bigger Delta. And then you look at the southeast states. And then you look at Appalachia, right? These are the areas where, at this time, 49 million Americans struggled putting food on the table. And it's like, well, what does that have to do with Virginia? Well, Virginia, particularly in Roanoke, that red dot is in the wrong spot. It should be over Roanoke. But there's 200 tracts identified as food deserts in our Commonwealth. 29 of those are 100% low access to food. 4 of those tracts are in Roanoke, and you can probably tell where I'm going. those 4 tracks are in the same areas where 581 came through, and people were displaced, and it looks like this. So the same area where you see 460, you see 581, and the pink is low access to a grocery store between 1 and 10 miles. And then you start looking at the low income that's there. And then, so these areas are directly impacted. And so we were asked to come in and look and see what we can actually, do with this. And of course, the lab, we started looking at health disparities, and I just pulled 2 just to kind of show, well, high blood pressure and diabetes in the same 2 areas, well over 35% for high blood pressure, well over 13% for people 18 and up with diabetes, way too high. And then you look at the same areas, everything in blue is a market or like a gas station, a fast stop, somewhere where you can go in and really quick, mostly buy cigarettes and things like that. So look at the number of quick marts or places like that. And then what's highlighted in red and the orange, the orange dots that are highlighted in red circles are the actual grocery stores that serve Roanoke. And there's none that are really close by in the areas that actually need it. That are 1 to 10, one actually a mile or half mile close to the food insecure areas. And so what you see, and there used to be grocery stores in this area, but what you see is a disinvestment by some of the big box stores, Kroger, Food Line. They've all moved to the periphery of this community, or these communities. Actually, there's quite a few of them. And so we in the lab were thinking about, okay, so we have this issue with food insecurity, and then we know from previous work we were looking at the high rates of vacancy, and so we did some work just looking at that. And what's missing from this slide, if there's nothing in green that will be less than 10% land vacancy that will make it stable. And so most of these communities, Melrose, Rugby, Loudon Melrose, Gainsboro, Hurt Park, they're either at risk, threatened, or completely hazardous. As you can see, the communities that fall right along the 460 corridor, greater than 35% vacancy. And so we had a couple groups of students that looked at, okay, well, what do we do with this, right? How do we take the vacancy and actually utilize it as an asset? And so looking at they developed the vacant land topology. I just put one slide to kind of show you what they're looking at, and then develop some strategies as to how to address, one being, yes, we need more housing, but what also is an issue here is the lack of a green space, adequate green space, sidewalks and things like that for these communities. So we were able to work with Hurt Park and Gainsboro and Melrose, Rugby, and Shenandoah West communities to develop these kind of quick schemes with them in design charrette, so they can then have more informed conversations with city planning officials, to how as to how to address vacancy, but also address the food insecurity problem. And I understand that community gardens, we know, can't solve everything, but it is a good step in a direction in terms of food sovereignty and also food as resistance to grow your own food. So these are a couple images that look at that work and how you can, you provide a place where people can grow food, but also, you want some places where people can, bring their kids and have a place to be and feel welcome that is about your community or there. And then, here's another example of that. So this is with Hurt Park, another one of those communities that had public housing built, public housing torn down, and then reimagined Hope 6 type properties that were put in place in this community, but still, is hazardous or at risk in terms of its land vacancy. And so we were approached by the neighborhood association to develop a couple schemes that could be used to not only have an opportunity to grow food, but again have an opportunity for students that attend Hurt Park Elementary, which is a couple blocks up from the garden, to have a place to where their science class could meet and things like that. We did an outreach with the students in the community at their schools, and I really want to understand from them what their heritage, what their food heritage was like what relationship they had with growing any of the food that they consumed. And they, one student, and this sticks with me, I asked, how they thought tomatoes grew. And one student was like, oh, those little, that comes in a grocery store, 4 in a pack, and is wrapped in, in cellophane. I was like, whoa, yeah, that's how you buy them, but how do they grow? They had no idea. And so we were able to, work with the youth in the community to really get them attached to growing their own food. And once you have, what happens when you have a piece of corn or a cucumber, like how do you then make salad or different things like that. So we're able to work with the youth, which was nice because then they could work with their parents, in this garden. So here are the students that we work with in the science class. We had their art class develop these panels that they created. They're all up around the garden. We have a large number of newcomers to America that live in this community, and so they were able to impart some of their wisdoms on some of the food and stuff that they grew in their own country, and we're able to develop that and map that onto the community garden. And so that's been going since, I guess, 2012, and it's still happening. So you can see, again, getting the students involved is really important, and establishing a program that works with the West End Center and with the Hurt Park Elementary. And then we also were able to reintroduce bees and pollinators back into the city at that scale as well. And then once Hurt Park had their garden design, Mountain View, which is an adjacent neighborhood, also wanted us to lead them through a process to develop a vacant parcel of land. And so we did that, and it was interesting that these two sister communities were there and supported each other through the issue framing and all of the design charrettes that we had and the reviews. And it was really nice to have them participate. And again, we had community build days. We got the students involved. We got other universities in the Roanoke and Salem area involved in building and transforming the garden. We worked closely with the Roanoke Garden Association in order to understand or develop ways that people can get plots and things like that. And then we look at food mapping, which I think is, food mapping, which I think is an important piece. So it's like, we understood that, there was vacancy. We understood that there's problems with accessing food. And so one of the students in the lab was like, well, I wonder what do they have access to? And so we did this is just a small sample of, I think, 3 or 4 stores. I'll go through this really quickly. What you want to look for in these diagrams is the green. All right, so we're looking for fresh produce or dairy. And we did this community mapping exercise with community members in the Melrose Rugby community. So we actually walked with them to the stores they have access to, and we did diagrams. And you can see there's not much green in any of these. Ironically, this store is called the Food Giant, and it wasn't much there. There's another piece there. So showing this, I'm a numbers person, so it's like in almost 30,000 square feet of space in the 4 stores that showed you the diagrams, about almost 29 square feet was devoted to fresh food. And so you wonder why the health disparities are the way they are, and you wonder, it's almost like food apartheid in a way. And so this is where the community gardens come in. We're now establishing a program where we can get a small box grocery store that can serve this area. There's also a mobile market now that serves this area, particularly now with COVID. That's been really nice. So we're, so it's nice to see that our work is having some type of influence on what's, what needs to be addressed in terms of food insecurity in the area. And then I want to show you this project is something that's not in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but it shows how our work within the Community Engagement Lab at Virginia Tech is getting recognized. This is a partnership with June Grant and Blink Lab out of Oakland, and Florida A&M University's architecture program, and also the Florida Housing Coalition. And this is a project that looks at Apalachicola, particularly the Hill neighborhood in Florida. And so quickly, so it's like, how do you take a predominantly African-American community that's dealing with property issues and dealing with, again, high rates of vacancy. From the surface level, things seem to be very at opposite ends with identity, community narrative, and so we were brought in to kind of help jumpstart some of the process with stakeholders and understanding the livelihood of the community, the heritage, and the notions of family heritage that was there, but also looking at updating some of the land use strategies that could be used to bring back the community as they start to look at building houses or reestablishing some of the houses that are fell into disrepair, but also how do you then develop a green network and bring economy back as well. So one of the things that we did pre-COVID, February of 2020, right before everything kind of stopped, we did a pop-up museum there in Apalachicola where we're able to use one of the existing shotgun houses, and we're able to do an exercise where community members can come in and map and do oral histories and really give their story about what the Hill neighborhood meant to them as an individual, but also for their families. So we're able to utilize those narratives to then think about how do we bring back commercial heritage hub with some of the remaining infrastructure that was there. How do we then look at business incubation within the community? How do we then establish a local economy that then is partnered with food security? So working with the ag college at FAM to do food science, do research, develop an institute that can work there with test plots, and then how do you take those plots and apply those to individual homes? And also, how do you bring together arts and culture? This community has a lot of history, and so how do you tie what's in the past, what the community is really known for, and then how do you project that towards the future? And it gets to this larger kind of concept, so it's a blueprint for a local ecosystem designed around African American land ownership, history, and culture. And then this last slide just talks about, for me, just trying to develop an ethos for disruptive engagement, and understanding in my personal life how I understand, and landscape architecture always gives me a way to understand things that I thought I knew about where I grew up. So question that for yourself, and then pedagogically, being disruptive in the ways and the risks that I'm willing to take, and how to teach and what to teach students so they can then develop their own critical thinking skills. And then in terms of practice and being a professional, how do we interrogate the practices of landscape architecture, and when it needs to be praised, that's great, but when we need to talk about things that we need to do to shift because we're going the wrong way, being able to do that and have the courage to do so, the courageous leadership to do so. And then also the public, right? It's like we as landscape architects have to stop being shade loving species, and we have to get out there. We have to be doing, we have to, the world needs us. So how do we then disrupt the status quo and stand up and do the things that we should be doing? And I will open it up for questions now.
CL, thank you so much.
Oh, no problem at all. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Good. Okay.
Thank you. So if anyone has questions, feel free to post them in the chat and/or raise your hand, and we'll be happy to take questions. Give everyone a moment. Maybe I'll just start off with a question, CL. Once again, thanks so much for the lecture. It's really fantastic to see your work and hear your viewpoint on it. You had in the beginning, you were talking a bit about the Delta, you're talking about Memphis, you're talking about also just some of the kind of health issues that pop up around landscape, particularly that are almost like, bigger than us, that envelop us. And then later on in the lecture, you used a term that I love, which, I love, but it's also awful, this idea of slow violence, right? This idea that, this kind of background of slow violence that we're working within. And I know, working in Louisiana for a large part of my life, there's a background in the Delta and in the Mississippi Delta that is, that is not necessarily questioned. And I would say it is this slow violence, the refineries, the kind of infrastructure, all of these pieces. And I think, landscape working within that realm, and developing projects, you are sometimes feel like you're swimming upstream, I guess, you know what I mean? And you're pushing back against this slow violence. And I'm wondering if you might talk a little bit more about that concept, because I find it really interesting, this environment we're working in that's constantly pushing back against us, environmentally, socially, kind of issues around environmental and social justice. There's a part of that like how we begin to frame our projects while also knowing that we're working within this kind of current that's pushing back against us. I find that really interesting, and maybe I'm pulling that out of your work, but I think that sits at the background of what you're talking about. I don't know if you might have anything else to say about that.
Yeah, that's actually, so it's one of those things where it's like it's almost like standing in front of a fire hose, right? Like 1,000 things coming at you at once. But I think it's important for us to, no matter that, we need to mobilize and understand the ways in which we as designers, right, we as educators can say, well, this is happening. Let's kind of address this. And you think about the modes of how you can address some things individually, or individual projects, and then how they can collectively have an impact. And I guess for me is like not to get discouraged by the 1,000 things that are coming my way, but have the courageous leadership to say, no, I'm gonna do something about this. Yep. And to me that's the beauty about teaching too, because it's like, as a practitioner, I was doing projects and it was great, and I was doing stuff, and then it's like I'm having a little bit of influence, but as a teacher, in a studio of 12 to 15 students, then it's like you get to impart all these little ways of mobilizing, and it's like more people that are thinking that way.
Right.
So I think that's the part where it's like really looking at the ways in which we should react, the ways in which we should intervene, no matter how much it's coming our way. I think we have an obligation. We might not have been physically the people who have cause these issues, but I think if we have the knowledge and skills to do something about it, and if we don't, and then we might as well be complicit in ourselves. Because I think for me, silence is an action, so, or inaction is an action. You've chosen not to do something. So if we have a chance to do it, let's band together and do it. Right. I just think that's for me, that's where I stand on that.
Great, thanks. So first question in the chat, Alyssa Diamond. Alyssa, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. I was trying to hide out, but I guess that's not allowed.
No, everyone knows that if they put something in the chat, I'm going to call on them.
Well, thank you so much for your talk. And I'm just curious, because I feel so much resonance with the work that you're doing and kind of dynamics I'm seeing in Charlottesville. But I'm wondering if you have an approach to migratory histories, because I see a lot of similarities in terms of the dynamics you're describing in Roanoke and Bluefield, in terms of people leaving, and especially the kind of racial demographics changing over time due to, racial terrorism, urban renewal policies, like purposeful displacement, that a lot of people who would have stories about these places are now gone, and how to claim kind of who has legitimate claims to these spaces, given that a lot of people who have been affected by these dynamics are no longer like physically in these cities. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. That's something that we grapple with for every project. We, once you start, unveiling the layers, and it's like, wow, there's a whole like chunk of the population that we wish we had, access to ask these critical questions. And sometimes we are lucky in a way that we can. It's almost, it's an old snowballing technique. We're able to talk to a community member who has a relative that's willing to, to chat with us. So sometimes we get lucky in that space, but we also realize that there's also a little bit of pain sometimes when you start to ask those questions as to why people have left. And so you try not to, open that up too much, but you do want to know, you want to know. So we try to allow for that process to happen as organically as possible through that. And I think that's where with our RAP process, where you reflect and then you articulate, that leaves space for people to be able to share their stories, whether it's through a phone call. Sometimes we get stuff through, email, or we'll put if we had a community, meeting, people share, like, hey, well, we had a meeting. Can you add? COVID times now, we do a lot of Google Forms, so we can get that information. But then in terms of the claim to the space, I think it just goes back to, who was there before, and then why did they have to leave, right? And I think that's the space that we have to kind of carve out and say, okay, well, what are the impacts of this level of decision making on the people who were there, and then what things are actually, that's the geographies, right? What geographies are then not singular, but they're stuck together? Because a lot of what I call uneven geographies, they're not in themselves by themselves, right? They're always within the context. And so it's this weird, it's like playing a Rubik's Cube a lot, where you're trying to just kind of, you're not going to always get to everything where it's like, it's perfect, but you try to unpack enough or reveal enough where you can get a story that makes sense, that then you check with the community, and then you take that and pivot that says, okay, now that we know this, then how can we utilize this story to move the narrative to where you want to be? And it's never going to be really 100% complete, but it's like you have to involve, and that's where I put the bell hooks, like our very presence is a disruption. To even have that conversation with the people that have been affected is a disruption, because a lot of this stuff has happened too. Decisions are made without having folks at the table with a voice. You can't give people a voice, we all have them. But what we can create is a space for people, for those voices to be heard. And so I think that's why the narrative piece is important. Hopefully I answered your question, Alyssa. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. So CL, I have one question from chat, and then I'm going to hand it over to Beth Meyer to ask a question. But from chat, Linnea asks, have you found any ways of continuing to engage effectively and safely during the pandemic? What lessons have you learned so far? Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of the things that's a reality through this is that, with a lot of the inequalities were already here. The COVID has made them be amplified. One of those is the digital divide, because normally it's like, oh yeah, we can have a digital meeting, but in reality, not everybody has equal access to online services, Zoom, all that kind of stuff. And so what we found is picking up the telephone helps. Going back to just calling people and having those conversations. It goes back to the narrative and story, and then also teaching students. So in the spring, when it was like, oh yeah, we're in school, and all of a sudden, nope, everything has to go online. That was a big shift for us. And so I had my 10 instructors in the residential college, and 125 students in the freshman class that had to pivot, and trying to have conversations with them about, what, just like when you call your friends, we need you to pick up the phone and actually call your our community members, and here's the ways that you can do this, right? So it's like a skill that we had, some of us in a certain age bracket, that we would talk to folks, and then now have to press buttons and apps and all this kind of stuff, that bringing that skill back to the forefront, to be in community, to be in relationship with someone, is one of the things that I found to work the best. It's crazy that it goes back to the telephone, or you even have, when you can't, be on Zoom or, Teams or whatever the other stuff is. So good question. Funny, the old days is the telephone. That's a funny.
Yeah.
Remember when we used to call people?
Right. Yeah.
Beth, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Brad. Hey, CL, it's great to see you.
Good to see you, Beth.
I'm so interested in your mapping of Roanoke. I remember driving through there thinking, wow, there's a story, because it's just so clear, the amount of urban renewal, and I appreciate it more now. And I guess it made me think of a question. Has anybody talked about reparations in terms of rezoning, the way in which, you look at that kind of magnitude of slow violence, and then how do you actually distribute wealth relative to rezoning, or an idea of the commons, or I don't even I'm thinking about something a landscape architect and a planner might do that's beyond analysis, but not design yet.
Mhm.
And is anyone talking about reparations and rezoning in innovative and critical ways?
Yeah, it's interesting. You don't hear much of that coming from the city just yet, but I just had a PhD student look at Greenway as reparations in a way, and I can send you that her dissertation. But she looked at, how can you utilize the Greenway processes in a way to provide the open space network that was pretty much taken away, right? Through planning policies, and then what what types of policies would then need to be enacted in the processes in order to do so by including the community, right, or communities in this way. So yeah, that work has not been done like holistically yet in terms of the commons and stuff, but it is interesting that I guess Dr. Lovely now she utilized the Greenway because that's how not communities, how cities tell a story about themselves. The Greenway is the story that Roanoke tells. We have outdoor recreation and this and this and this, right? And that's why I went back to the Nolan plan, because they've had a chance to actually do something back in 1928 about this, right? And they still haven't done so. And so, yeah, so I do think that that is a level of work that needs to be done moving forward. Maybe we can do that, Beth. We should think about that.
That sounds like a fun project. Brad, can I do a little follow-up because of CL's comment about
Of course.
John Nolan? I mean, Nolan seems like a totally different character than Olmsted Jr. and his colleagues. I mean, everything I hear about Olmsted brothers is they were writing these racially segregated city plans and subdivision codes. It's like they had very little to do with their father and his social agenda. So Nolan, he's the first graduate of Harvard's landscape architecture program. And I'm wondering what you've learned about him in terms of his work in the South, because he did a lot of work in both Virginia and North Carolina.
Yeah, so he keeps popping up in places where it's like he was a little bit ahead of his time in a way. Is what I'm getting out of this, and so with the work we're doing in Roanoke is now making me go back and look and see more of his footprint in the ways where I'm interested in the ways where he was ahead of his time, and then the policies that were enacted to actually, it's like no, we're going to put that away, and so that duality in the space in between to investigate that is something that I'm starting to now get into, because he has been, it's like when you read a good novel and it's like this character that keeps popping up. That's Nolan for me. And it's like, well, there's a relationship there between equitable space and planning practices, that we had someone that was actually putting this out, but then yet these policies and the folks that are in power, that's where the power relations stuff comes into play. So yeah, there's a lot there too. That's like 2 papers at least.
Okay, great. We'll
Yeah.
talk later.
All right.
Thanks.
All right.
Great. So I have a few more questions, CL. So Susan Bristol asks, at what point did your personal experience become valid or validated in academia? What advice do you have to students who want to merge personal narratives with quality academic work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I grew up in Tennessee, in Memphis, and so it was I was gonna lay out the story. So I grew up in what we call a chocolate city, and I get to Arkansas, and I'm one of 2 African Americans in the program, right? And I graduated in 2002, the second African American to graduate from the program. 2% graduation rate at that point, and I was like, what is going on in our profession? What is happening? And I was ready to transfer and do all this other kind of stuff and do something completely different. But then, I realized there was a lot of work to be, even then, before I knew I was going to be a professor and all this kind of stuff. I realized there was a lot of narratives that were left out of, like, they even get me talking about landscape history and all this kind of stuff, or what's not there. But I realized that there was a place for me, and that I needed to stay the course. And actually staying in the program taught me a lot more about where I grew up than I knew. And that was the validation. I was like, oh, there's a place in this where I can see how the profession that have chosen to do can actually have a positive impact on my community, right? It wasn't, it goes beyond like making, beautiful gardens and all this kind of stuff. There's actually work that can be substantial work that can be done. And so for me, it happened probably my third or fourth year. And then, going to be a professor now, it's just like, I try to be the professor that I wish I had in school. I had no one who looked like me at all in any of my education, from undergrad all the way up to becoming a doctor. And so I realized that I needed to stay the course in academia so I could be that for someone else, because I might be that person that says like, oh, hey, there's a person who looks like me, that this is going to be helpful here. And then for the other students that don't look like me, there's a perspective that's different than maybe what's in the book or this other kind of stuff. And I think that provides internal validation, but also external validation. If we want to, as a profession, get to where we need to be, right, as our demographics in this country are changing. So hope that was helpful.
Great, thanks. So Stephanie Landrigan, do you want to ask your question? And then after that, Veena Shah.
Sure, thanks. Hi, Ciel. Good to see you. One of the things is when we have community as client, how do we engage with the community, start that relationship and keep that community relationship, as you indicated we needed to build that as educators? And because of course we have a group that moves on, and so how do we do that and honor the community and our education mandate?
Yeah, so it's interesting when we go into some of our community engagement processes, we only show up in the places where we're asked to be there, right? And so part of that is establishing the trust, and that's a process. I mean, we've been working in some of our communities since 2009, and with the gardens, and sometimes we do smaller projects. I continually go to community meetings, even in their virtual format. Even if we're not having anything active, I still show up, and just to let them know, hey, I'm here, just in case something, because you never know. We might hear something, they might not think it's a landscape architecture, problem that can be like, oh, yep, but let's talk about that, right? Another thing that I've been able to do too with the lab is getting the undergraduate students and grad students to also attend those meetings, so they show up. So it's like so you got to think about, as a faculty member, we only have so much time to and it gets worse with all the other things that we have to do. So it's like, how do you establish the touch points, right? So from the beginning of the project to even before the project starts, you have to establish trust. But when the project happens, who are the people that are communicating, how they're communicating, and then the check-ins after the project. So you don't have that parachuting when you float in all slow, you do the project, and then you take off on foot and you disappear. We want to be there throughout, right? And so you have to think about this is where issue framing and problem framing comes in. Once you've established the connection with the community, how do you then begin to say, okay, well, here are the things that I hear you talk about as issues. Here's the ways that we as students, faculty, it might be a research project here, it might be a community engagement piece here, it might be a class here. So you have to scaffold, right, the engagement, so it's not a one-off. And take small pieces, and it's okay. And then you might have a graduate student that says, I want to do this for a project, or you might have a undergrad student that might want to do this work. One of the interesting things from the community methods course that's helped is we have students that are not in landscape architecture who take that class, and they bring these other perspectives, and that also helps us kind of establish trust, because I'm not a business person, but we do have a person that knows how to do that. And so that's allowed us to come back a semester or a year later to continue to meet those needs. So I would say the more touch points you have to let them know that you're there for them works, particularly when you start looking at real time versus semester time, because those are two different things. So the time that it takes to establish trust, the time that it takes to actually get your learning objectives, because you should meet those for your class, and then the communities could be, hey, we need this by this time. Those don't always match up. So you really have to be flexible in that regard. And we've had cases like with COVID that happened this past year where we've called the community, asked them what they needed, and it was completely different from what the project was, because their goals had shifted and what they needed has shifted because of COVID, and they needed some other kind of things. And we were adaptable. Say, okay, well, we can come back to this project. Let us help you with this. And it could have been, something like designing a flyer or doing something on social media, or whatever the case may be. So being flexible and having multiple touch points of contact. Yeah.
Thank you. Veena?
Yeah, thank you so much for answered my question, which was similar. How do you maintain the long-term relationships with the community and the short-term that the students would be available? So I was just wondering if there are any specific measures that you take to ensure a wholesome experience for the students.
I think I heard everything. So you want to know about how do we maintain long-term relationships, and what was the second part?
Just how do you ensure that the students have a whole experience and they are not just partly inserted in and then taken out?
The second part's about maintaining a wholesome learning experience.
Okay, yeah. So there's a piece, when you think about design education and when is the right moment to engage, right? So you can't get students, you have to kind of scaffold that in. I keep using the word scaffold, but you do a small piece for students that are just starting. You just don't dump them right in, right? Because you have to go by what we think the students are ready for, but also that meets the goals of the course, right? And so a little bit of that also is training the students before they get into a community meeting setting. What does that mean when you're interacting with folks that are not like yourself, right? So it's like, I think the wholesome experience for students is to not just drag them into an environment without preparing them, right? And so there's a little bit of onboarding that you have to do ahead of time to make sure the students have space to ask questions. How is this going to go? What do I do in this case? And so that's where the methodologies course for our program is an important part, because you don't want to disadvantage your students as well, because this is a learning environment and we want you to be engaged practitioners when you get out, but utilize the space in school to kind of test things out in a way, right? But you don't want that to be a traumatic experience in a way. So you can't just, it's engagement is not like the little orange guy on Google where you can pick them up and drop them. We don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you prepare students in a manner that they are that they could be successful. And engagement is not neat, right? It's messy, but I do think as instructors, as faculty, we have an obligation to also prepare students to do so.
Great. How are you doing, CL? I know I have 3 more questions for you if you're up for it. Are you still up for it?
Yeah, let's go. Let's do these 3. That's what
Okay, 3 more. We'll let you go after that. So one, is it Arjit Sen? Do you want to ask your question? Or would you like for me to do it?
I can.
Okay.
Thank you very much from the city of Milwaukee. We delivered Wisconsin to you guys. So greetings from there. I just wanted to find out how you pay your community experts. That's been my biggest problem. The university seems to not really recognize the fact that community experts are equal experts, both in teaching as well as co-collaborating, co-creating knowledge. And getting to pay them is really difficult. And so what exactly, do you have strategies that could help us here?
Yeah, that's been something. Well, we've been lucky, I guess, in that regard, where we hadn't had to deal with the university with trying to pay or having to, be in a situation where we're paying the community experts directly from the university. But I have been part of grants and things like that where we've been able to help write letters of support and things like that so they can get things that they need. And so that's what we've been doing a lot of, is writing strong letters of support, for grantees. But from the university standpoint, I don't have much experience with the university paying our community partners with that. We've been lucky to have community partners that are really engaged and really want to help the students out with the work. But then sometimes we do get a letter or something and there's hey, we're going after this grant, we need this to hire X, Y, and Z, and so we're able to provide some in-kind work kind of thing and research and letters of support to do so. So yeah,
Thank you.
that's a good question. I haven't I haven't faced that one at Virginia Tech yet, but it might be coming up. Not sure.
Great, thanks. I have one more question for you. Jason Espy, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, first of all, Dr. Ciel. So a great presentation. I do a lot of work in food and place systems planning, the intersection of the two. And I really liked how food was a theme throughout a lot of your projects: food insecurity, food injustice, food availability. But I also think that food, is also part of the narrative of who we are, different groups of people. I just want to point out Michael Twitty. If you don't know him, he was a great keynote speaker, blew my mind. It was awesome. Taught me a lot. But I don't want to put that in just to give him a shout out. I would like to hear more from you just about your work with food, if you could, sir.
Yeah. So a lot of the work that we started with food. Our engagement in Roanoke started with food and understanding growing your own food is a resistance, right? It is a way to kind of to stand up. And so I think back to my grandmother and the community elders in Tennessee, where they grew food, and it was like, that's what you did. And right. And so it was also a portion of that too, as a youngster, where you would, I remember taking collard greens from my grandmother and going down the street and doing this and then bartering back and getting, so it allowed me to understand my own neighbors in a way. And so it was just part of what it was to be a community member growing up and understanding the elders. So as a designer, it's just like you look at some of these communities that are dealing with food insecurity, and sometimes it's like, it's not that they don't have the knowledge of how to grow food. A lot of the elders do, but it's providing the platform or the space for the food to be grown in a way, right? Also getting to understand some of the planning officials and to understand that, hey, just because you have a vacant parcel, that doesn't have to be vacant. We can actually use that, right, as an impetus for community change. And food makes sense. You break bread with people, it makes sense, right? And a lot of our work too, some strategies, it's like, it's not necessarily have a community garden that stays the same. One of the strategies that we've utilized is like, hey, we've done a garden and it's temporary, and you get 1 or 2 seasons out of growing that, and then it becomes a site for a house, and then the garden moves, right, and then it becomes get a couple more seasons out of that, and then it becomes a site for a house. So it's almost like using the food as a way to visually show that progress is happening in the community. I also think food is a way to celebrate many cultures, and there's so many things that you can learn through the diversity of food and how people use the same ingredients. That opens up conversations, and I just think there's power in that, and within that power is the resistance, right? So we don't have the grocery stores. We can grow our own food, right? So we're not going to wait. We're not going to wait for somebody to help us. We can do something about this. Then we can become stronger and then be able to support other members of the community who may not be able to do so. And it is a landscape architecture issue. I was in a meeting a couple years ago, and someone said, well, you do food insecurity work. What does it have to do with landscape architecture? I was like, it's spatial. It deals with people. It's a landscape architecture issue, right? And they're like, oh, okay. I never thought about it like that. I was like, I'm glad I can tell you what we do, part of what we do.
Excellent. CL, thank you so much for your time. It's been really fantastic to have you. Actually, the third question I was told was answered through all of your other questions. You're so efficient. So
That's good. Well, thank you all for the opportunity. And if you need to contact me, Brad has my email. I'm not far away, just a couple hours up the road. So this has been fun.
Yeah, it's been great to have you. Great to have you, like you said, from right down the road, although the whole world is compressed due to Zoom these days. But we'll have to have you up here soon in person. And
I'll look forward to it.
All right. Have a good night.
Thanks, CL. That was great.
Thank you.